All right, back for another video. And this video is going to be a lot shorter than the last one, I promise. That's not only good news for you, but it's good news for me because editing these things is not fun. Today, we're going to talk about news sobriety. What is news sobriety? So glad you asked. It is the third step in this 5-step program to move beyond partisan politics. I've already discussed the second step, which is understanding our human psychology and learning to listen to the best from the other side. This step required we add information and knowledge about how we are hardwired, our psychological propensities and pitfalls, and how we need to learn to listen better. These were action steps, things to add to our life and perspective. But now we're going to include a complementary step. And what I'm proposing is that in addition to addition, we need to learn subtraction. There's a lot in our lives that's influencing us that is polluting us. More important than air filters and water filters, we need information filters. Never before have we lived in an age where a near infinite amount of information is at our fingertips and is bombarding us every waking moment. The irony is that even while that is the case, it is true that the internet has, in many ways, democratized the power inherent in information. We nevertheless find ourselves in information silos, miraculously. Even with so much information at our disposal, we seek out confirming and validating sources and end up in tunnels that are deaf to most of what is out there. As E.O. Wilson once said, the real problem with humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And because we have access to this godlike technology, we all the more like to think of ourselves as godlike, forgetting that we have Paleolithic emotions steering our cognition, as Jonathan Haidt showed us in the last video, not rational brains that can sift through the noise and find truth. So what we find ourselves in is quite the mess. Big news corporations and powerful interests on the right and the left have no trouble aiming billions of dollars of AI superpower at your and my Paleolithic brains and shaping conforming constituents, social stereotypes, people eager to be inflamed and mobilized because our hive instinct is being stimulated. Just like these powers can shape our consumption habits to grow their profits, they can also shape and reinforce our social identities. The solution I'm proposing is divorce. Divorce yourself from media consumption. Quit cold turkey. Become news sober. I've been news sober for 8 years and it's been wonderful. My one and only goal right now is that by the end of this video to have convinced some of you to start practicing news sobriety, to stop watching MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, stop listening to Stephanie and Rachel or Sean and Mark, and even NPR. When I've suggested this to people, mostly family members, here are the 4 responses I tend to get. First, I'm able to listen to the news without getting emotionally riled up. Second, I realize what I'm listening to has a bias, so I take that into consideration. Third, I don't listen that often. And fourth, I just want to stay connected. I want to know what's going on. If I stop listening, I'd be in the dark. Having conversations will become difficult. I have 4 counter arguments that I invite you to consider. First, to those of you who say, I'm able to listen to the news without getting emotionally riled up. I hear you, and I agree with that you are less emotionally triggered than most people. And that's a good thing, and I'm happy for you. Nevertheless, even the Zen-like, emotionally even-keeled types are being formed by the sources they listen to. And what we're defining as the problem has layers, one of which is anger and dehumanizing their side, which builds up to the potential for violence. But underneath that problem is the fissure that is amplified due to us consuming one side of the story for years on end and failing to really listen to the other side. And this part of the problem remains even for the most Zen-like people if they keep listening to their one-sided news sources. You can't help but to be shaped to conform to one side of the aisle or the other. Second, to those who say, I realize that what I'm listening to has a bias, so I take that into consideration. I don't want to be rude, but pause and just really think about the logic of that statement. I realize what I'm listening to has a bias, so I take that into consideration. I take that into consideration. Sure, but how are you able to objectively consider things when your ability to consider is always being shaped by one side? You see the inherent problem in this? Okay. Would you trust someone who's on the opposite side of the aisle, who only listens to news sources from that side, to be able to discern the biases they are receiving from their talking heads? No way. And you'd be right. No human is good at recognizing their own biases, especially when have them reinforced all the time, right? Third, for those of you who say, I don't listen that often. For some people with alcohol, moderation does work just fine. But this is where our analogy to sobriety with news breaks down a little. Here's why moderation with the news doesn't work. It doesn't work because even if you found the willpower to consume tiny doses without getting sucked in, those tiny doses are still one-sided inputs. They're still a part of the silo machine. They're still not just informing you, but forming you. And here's the really hard thing to recognize. You will still be receiving much of the same formation simply by rubbing shoulders with the people you see every day. As studies have shown, we increasingly live and are surrounded by like-minded people, so you will still be hearing much of the same perspective even when you become news sober. So you might wonder, what would be the good in quitting the news then? If I'm going to be shaped the same way by those around me, do I have to cut off all my relational ties too? No, obviously we can't and don't want to do that. But I'll tell you the difference it will make. By not watching and listening to the news, you will be engaging in those politically energized conversations less. I know this to be the case. I've experienced this. And one less voice in the echo chamber reduces the volume. Now imagine if more and more people did this. You see where I'm going. This is the key. This is why this new sobriety thing is not optional. It's the cornerstone for changing our culture. The culture wars will cool if the combatants step out of the ring. This is not conjecture, it's just reality. Fourth, to those who say, I just want to stay connected. I want to know what's going on. If I stop listening, I'd be in the dark. Having conversations would be difficult. It's good old FOMO here, right? The fear of missing out. I can say firsthand that this fear is overblown. Yes, there have been numerous times where I arrived at church or some other place and people were talking about some shooting or the death of some famous person. I was momentarily not in the know and had to ask questions. Though sometimes if you just sit and listen, you'll get all the details anyway. But usually, I like to state outright. I like to lead with the fact that I'm news sober, and so I don't know what's going on. And I just ask if they'll fill me in. And not once in 8 years has anyone said to me, what's wrong with you? Really? Or you live under a rock? And I don't think it's because I'm 6'2" and look intimidating. Rather, normal people are just not that rude or simply don't care. Instead, they happily fill me in. I'm serious. In 8 years, I've never had anyone ridicule or look down on me for this. I think the deeper issue is probably your own insecurity. If you're the type of person who feels like you need to be seen as being in the know and having all the answers, then yes, these kinds of interactions may prove psychologically difficult. But there's no reason in reality that they need to be awkward. And my thinking is that if you did meet a person who actually ridiculed you for not knowing the news, stop and think. Are you really going to let the opinion of a person like that matter to you? Such a person just be signaling their own insecurities and ego. What has been amazing to me is actually how little conversations around the news matter. They are probably less a part of your life right now than you perceive. And if you were to drop them all together, I promise you life would still provide you with more than enough to talk about to anyone. I don't think I can overstate this point. But I want to take you back to my freshman sociology course where this all clicked for me. I had a professor who helped me see that the news stations are not just adding their spin to the stories that dominate the headlines, they're selecting the headlines themselves. Does that make sense? It's not just that one side is providing a conservative perspective on a particular issue while the other is offering a liberal interpretation. The problem goes deeper than that. The bigger problem is that someone else, the media, is deciding for us what the issue is in the first place that we should be caring about. I know some people argue that, well, the media is looking for ratings, so they're actually reacting or responding to issues people care about. So the issues are really reflective of the public's will. I'm here to argue that's not that simple. For starters, to the extent that it is true, the psychological science backing it up argues that this is happening because these sources are feeding off of our fears, selecting our worst hardwired traits to reinforce, and then justify going there by saying it's just our human nature that craves this information. So while yes, we should blame ourselves for this predicament, we can simultaneously recognize that the industry knows our weaknesses and is exploiting them. Obviously, these videos I'm creating are an attempt to get us as individuals to change because no network or news outlet is going to change. And our participation is a part of the problem. Call me a conservative, but I think that before we go after change in institutions, we should seek to change ourselves. But I want people to see how these media giants should not be let off the hook. How they're working against you, against me, against what is best for all of us. They are not just passively reporting on what we want to hear. They are seeking ratings, profit, and incentivized to select stories that will ensnare us emotionally. Remember how in the last video we discussed that we are less rational than we think. Our emotions are the elephant, and our reason the small rider who rarely can steer the behemoth. If this is true, then the only way to fight back is to quit watching and quit listening altogether. Don't let the elephant in the room. Please, think about how much of the news is information that is largely irrelevant. But more than that, think about how many things that truly do matter that the news is not covering. Imagine replacing all the time you've spent listening to the news with reading books by the Gottmans. Imagine what that would do for your marriage and consequently your whole life. Think about what you really want from life. Now tell me, is listening to the news helping you in any way, shape, or form to live better? A few years ago, I heard a kind of formula for living by a guy named Derek Sivers on the Tim Ferriss podcast. It's another way of getting at what we're talking about. Derek Sivers has this formula that's fascinating. It has 4 parts. First, he argues that almost nothing is objectively true. Second, beliefs are placebos. Third, rules and norms are arbitrary games that can be changed. And fourth, he says, refuse ideology, accept ideas individually. So much of the psychology I've read backs this up. Now, here's the thing. I happen to be a Christian, and I definitely do not believe my thoughts around God are placebos, nor do I deny that there are objective truths. But here's what most people don't seem to get. I still think that what Sivers is arguing is true for 98% of life. The vast majority of our beliefs are placebos to help us navigate the world, and most of the rules and norms are extremely arbitrary. Just like what the news stations deem as worthy issues to report on, when you step back, you can see these issues are extremely arbitrary, very subjective. This is a philosophical exercise, but it's worth doing. Who gets to decide what is important? Answer that question. Why do you trust the media to decide for you? Do you want the media to decide for you? I know we can never be truly free people. I understand the case against free will and the arguments that we're always shaped by our environment and our genes, but I think it's a great mistake to deny all human agency. And yes, we tell ourselves all kinds of non-truths or partial truths or insignificant truths as rationalizations or justification for how we want to live life. All the psychology backs that up, and we will always be a part of our own problem. But what is the alternative? We need to ask ourselves that very question. What is the alternative? To passively permit the media and networks or even culture writ large to have all the say? I think what Derek Sivers is advocating, what I meditated on a lot, is that paradoxically, amidst all the forces that are shaping us, we still have some agency. And to live a meaningful life means exercising that agency. So much of what we take for granted isn't objectively true. So many of our beliefs are placebos. So many of the rules and norms are arbitrary. So what I'm saying is that the line between what society at large believes and what you believe is blurry. The line between society and you is blurred. You are a part of the whole. You can never fully divorce yourself from the larger culture. And there are many reasons you probably shouldn't want to. But this doesn't mean that you have to be its pawn. This doesn't mean that you and I can't in some tangible ways rebel and act independently of the mores and trends that surround us. It doesn't mean that you can't awaken to the fact that even the expectations you have for yourself have often been given to you. That is to say, you've internalized the beliefs and norms of the culture and are trying to appease them. I encourage you to stop and think about this. Do you really want to be conforming to these expectations? When you really take the time to do this, you become more you. That's the secret sauce. It takes time to discover yourself, to know yourself. It's a process. And some of that process, I'm arguing, is about deconstructing the things that have been shaping us thus far. And what I'm further arguing is that to truly engage the process well, so much of it is about eliminating influences that we don't want lording over us. Perhaps you've heard of the term via negativa. Nassim Taleb employs the concept in interesting ways that nicely fit into what we're talking about. For starters, he argues that so much of the information we are surrounded by is noise and commentary that in the moment people take to be truth, but as time goes along is revealed to be full of errors. So there's a wisdom in ideas and information that have stood the test of time. And a prudent person recognizes this pattern and then has the self-control to disengage, to stop listening to the temporary chatter of the news stations and journalists. Here's what he writes. So the central tenet of the epistemology that I advocate is as follows. We know a lot more what is wrong than what is right. Or phrased according to the fragile, robust classification, negative knowledge, what is wrong, what does not work, is more robust to error than positive knowledge, what is right, what works. So knowledge grows by subtraction more than by addition, given that what we know today might turn out to be wrong, but what we know to be wrong cannot turn out to be right, at least not easily. A little later, he adds, another kind of via negativa, a good system is one that protects the ordinary guy from bad influences. Or, keeping one's distance from an ignorant person is equivalent to keeping company with a wise man. News sobriety. The subtraction of one-sided stories. Stories picked by someone else and deemed important for your life. Subtract this noise and you won't become less informed. You'll open yourself, become better informed. Informed in the ways you want to be informed, about things you want to be informed about. That is the great beauty of this new sobriety practice. Subtraction will create the space for you to add in more things of beauty and meaning to your life. In lieu of watching the news, you can sit down and have a meal with your family. You can give your spouse a back rub and check in. You can play with your kids. You can exercise. You can play a game or go for a walk, enjoy nature, study a second language, read old books that might have legit wisdom in them. The list is endless. If this resonates with you, if you want this freedom, let's talk about how to practically implement it in your life. James Clear is author of a book called Atomic Habits, which has been like the bestseller on Amazon for years. And there's a quote from this book that I've requoted hundreds of times. It's so simple, yet so profound. It goes like this. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. In other words, just wanting to stop listening to your news source will not be enough. Our habits are called habits for a reason. To break a habit, we need to replace it with a new habit, a new system, a new way of being, even as he insightfully gets at in his book, A New Identity. In Clear's third law for behavior change, he explains how we need to not only make good choices easier, but bad habits harder. He says we need to employ what psychologists call commitment devices, which are choices we make in the present that control our actions in the future. Examples in our case might include deleting or blocking news apps or social media, getting rid of other screens in the house where we consume news, or unfollowing people in social media who post a lot about politics. What is really important is that you're tailoring these interventions to work for you. You have to be honest about your habits and motivations. To encourage good habits, James Clear says you want to make them obvious, make them attractive, make them easy, and make them satisfying. But for habits that we want to break, he says to make them invisible, make them unattractive, make them difficult, make them unsatisfying. So if the habit we're trying to break is listening to NPR, how can you go about doing this? Take it off your radio preset in the car. That was important for me. Remove the app from your phone, or find something else, like a kind of music or an audiobook that you enjoy listening to even more, and make that easy to access as an attractive alternative. I want to stress how important it is that you take the bull by the horns and be aggressive with your system changes. You should let others know that this is what you're doing as well, not as a humble brag, but for accountability. If you tell a loved one that you're no longer going to listen to MSNBC and they catch you, they can call you out. Here's the thing. Becoming news sober is better than any detox diet you've ever been on. And like anyone who understands nutrition and diet, you don't go on a diet for 3 months and then go back to eating junk food. You just gain all the weight back. No, the diet becomes a lifestyle. When I say practice news sobriety, I mean forever.
Forever, forever, ever, forever, ever.
Yes, forever. But the wonderful thing is that unlike food diets, this diet is so much more rewarding. With food, you really are missing out on some awesome tasting stuff. A healthy food diet is a genuine sacrifice. We all know that. But with eliminating toxic TV, you're just clearing your mind, even your calendar, so you do all kinds of more productive stuff. I can't imagine someone who starts practicing new sobriety, changing their mind, relapsing, or quitting. It's just too wonderful. Give it a try. I promise you'll agree. And as I've explained, I don't believe this is an optional step along the path to healing our partisan divide. Because of our psychological hardwiring, it's naive to think we can heal and reach across the aisle without first breaking free from our information silos. So I plead with you, be courageous. Be the first person in your family or friend group to practice new sobriety. Tell them you made this change. That will be some good news to spread. Thank you. God bless.